Welcome back to Season 5 of the True Blue Conversations podcast with your host, Adam Bloom. G'day, podcasters. Before we get underway with True Blue Conversations, just wanted to give a huge shout out to our friend and sponsor, the Warrior U podcast, hosted by Bram Connolly. Bram is a former Special Forces commander, best-selling author, popular podcast host, and human optimization pioneer. He has an authentic style and the unique ability to not only motivate, but also take people on a journey of self-discovery. Through the Warrior U podcast, Bram interviews guests in a bid to explore all things human optimization, resilience, leadership, and coffee. His book, The Commando Way, a Special Forces Commander's Lessons for Life, Leadership and Success, is available now on amazon.com.au. So from Adam Bloom and all of us here at True Blue Conversations, a big shout out to the Warrior U podcast, Bram Connolly, and his new book, The Commando Way, out now.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today, I have a very, very special guest. I have wanted to get this lady on the podcast for almost 2 years now, and I'm coming to you live from her house, and I'm actually pinching myself sitting across from her, and it's none other than Margaret Cunneen SC, and she has joined us today to talk about as school, family, hobbies. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, well, of course, I have to go back to 60 years ago. I was in kindergarten, and so life was black and white. In fact, the memories are black and white. Maybe it's because the pictures are too, the photographs are as well, and TV was too. So it was a fairly colourless existence, but a good solid education from the Catholic nuns at Belmore. In primary school, and then off to Santa Sabina at Strathfield with some more nuns who did do a very, very good job considering they were paid nothing. God bless them all. And but my big hobby as a kid, and maybe I haven't even ever told you this, I was a girl guide.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
And that opened my world as a 10-year-old when I first made my guide promise and found out about camping and hiking and horse riding and archery and many other great things that I never would have done but for guides. And the great thing that I think it awakened in me was a sense of service. And sometimes I worry that kids don't necessarily have that these days. Between a combination of what the nuns told us and what guides taught us is you're in this life to help others. If you start worrying about yourself all day long, then you're only going to go bonkers. All you have to do to feel good about yourself in this life as a kid or as an adult is just go out and do something for someone else. So it really engendered a sense of service, guides, and the other thing I loved about it was the rank structure, the uniform, getting more and more badges. The first badge I did was when I was 10 was the knitting badge because I'd had two grandmothers who taught me. I was just a perfect knitter, and the lady who tested me for it couldn't even believe I'd done my own pullovers and everything, so she got me to knit a few plains and pearls on the spot to prove I could do it. And then I just was addicted to getting badges and ultimately became a Queen's Guide when I was 15, and then just after my 16th birthday, the ceremony occurred at Government House, and I went and met the Governor, Sir Roden Cutler, and it was just, it's hard to get a prouder day than that for me, but I went from 10 to 16 in guiding, and that's a very formative time for any human being, but the way that you could just learn so many things that I never could have learnt as a kid with not that many other outlets. Certainly you had school, but school was about schoolwork then, not much extracurricular, but guiding gave me things that my parents never could offer me for one reason or another, just all the pastimes, all the hobbies and things that you could do. And so, but the sense of service, the sense of, and going around doing, we used to call it sense for service and probably still do, it's like Bob a job for Scouts, and honestly, the Child Protection Authorities would never go for it now, because you'd go on your own, knocking on houses, on front doors to do jobs, sweeping and so forth. And you were probably very vulnerable, but fortunately, I didn't come to grief doing that, and it was a terrific grounding for what's important in life. You don't think of yourself first.
Absolutely, and you say with Sir Roden Cutler VC like that he was an amazing man, and what he did during the war to receive his Victoria Cross and then go on, like that's. I've been privileged to meet a couple of Victoria Cross recipients, and they're just so humble, and that, like, as you say, as a 16-year-old meeting Sir Roden Cutler, like that's a huge honour.
Adam, right over there, when we finish this, I have my photograph shaking his hand with the left hand with the Guides and Scouts and handshake, and I'm so very proud that ever happened, because it was just to meet such a man whose full legacy I didn't appreciate at the time.
Absolutely, and you talk about service, and we'll get further into the podcast. We'll get down and we'll talk about that shortly. But I want to go back to your love of, where did the love of the law come in, and was it always something that you wanted to do?
It seemed like the right thing to do. I think my father started it, although perhaps he lived to regret it. But he used to think that I was a bit of an arguer. And I was strongest in English at school because I was a huge reader. That was the only way to find anything out in those days, was to read books. And
the internet didn't exist then,
exactly,
did it?
Of course not. And so sometimes I'd sit down and try to read the encyclopedia from start to finish, and I'd just read anything, because what else was there to do? And so English was a bit of a strength, and I was also a debater at school on the debating team, even though I was terrified. I was bloody terrified of public speaking, and I think I'm finally over that, but it's taken a really, really long time. And everyone is, of course, deep down. But so I was, those things combined, and law seemed to be the thing. But I never had the confidence to think I'd get into it. But I did. And however, I couldn't do it full time, as it turned out, because I don't know if Dad just didn't want me to get too big for my boots. Mum's still living and says that he had that attitude, and he didn't really want a daughter to feel that she had anything over him. And so he had done engineering at Tech, and he said, well, you could, if you want to do anything like that, you can do it too. And so I found myself not living at home anymore, and so I went straight into the Attorney General's department as a clerk and started law that night part-time, and did both the bachelor's and the master's degree part-time. But gee, it set me up to use every minute of every day.
So talk me through that, being you're working as a clerk and you're studying part-time, and what was the hardest part in achieving your law degree?
Well, it wasn't that difficult. Just I didn't fail anything. Probably staying out of the pub would be the hardest thing, because...
Well, we're having a beer now as we're recording this.
I'm glad you like a twoies, just like me, Adam.
Absolutely. So, but for you, looking back, was there... it wasn't too hard, but was there any adversity that you had to overcome looking back?
Yeah, well, when I look back, I think, why did it have to be so hard? Why was I living out of home and paying rent and having to work all day, study all night, and do assignments on the weekends? It was a bit oppressive, and I missed a lot of things, really. I missed that peer group that people who go to uni during the day get, and I've noticed that in the law. Everyone else has this group that and I had a group too, but with great respect to the dear chaps, most of them are dead now, because I was the youngest in this part-time class. And so I was the youngest of. The average age was a bit over 30, and it was a part-time law course for people who'd tried before and couldn't, and that it was meant for people already working in the law, and it was 90% male. And so I was the youngest of the 150 intake of the first intake of UTS, but it was called the New South Wales Institute of Technology then, but it's now a great law school, and I'm very proud to have been in the first intake. But I didn't really have a peer group that was my age or at my stage of things, and so there's a bit of, you miss out on a fair bit for that. Still. With the blokes I did go with, they certainly taught me how to drink.
Well, and I think too, looking back now, Margaret, as you say, in the years gone by, it's life lessons. Like you learnt, you weren't living at home. Looking back now, the hardships you faced, but that would help you later on in your career. So it was all life lessons that you had to go, and any young person has to sort of go through that similar situation.
That's true. Everyone's going to get some sort of hard time. And I say this to my poor clients all the time, especially if they're young. I'm sorry that this very big journey and hardship is with you now because you're so young, and it might be crushing for you, but don't let it be. You've got to look at it as lucky, because nothing in the future is going to be as hard as this, because it's so unpredictable and it's so long and taxing.
Well, you look at it too in the sense that you see people at their very worst and their most vulnerable, and you are dealing with situations that are so, in some instances, traumatic. And like, I think that we'll get on later on in the podcast, but the biggest thing that I've seen from you is the empathy that you have for your clients.
Well, it's a pleasure, really. I like people a lot, and I've been one of those people who just prefers to start with trusting and liking people, and then if they don't come up to what I expected, it's a bit disappointing, but I'd rather just hope that it goes well. And I've been let down a few times by people like that, because for me, it's easier just to be nice to everyone, hope they treat me back nicely. But of course, as we learn over the years, some people mistake kindness for weakness. Absolutely. And then when you have to, when they absolutely throw it in your face and you have to get sharp with them, they go, "Oh, what a bitch." But it never had to be.
Yeah,
never had to be.
And I think too, the thing I love about you is you're very much like me. You're a straight shooter. You call a spade a shovel, and you, like me as well, is that you treat people the way you want to be treated. But if you break that, like, you're loyal, but if you break that loyalty, that's it. You're done. And there's no coming back. And you shouldn't apologise for that. That's
right. Luckily, people, it's a self-choice thing, isn't it? People ban themselves by their...
Absolutely.
It was a big circle, and then if you go through something where people are loyal, and you remember who was loyal and who was nowhere, who scattered.
Absolutely, and we'll get into that later on in the podcast with you, with a couple of controversies, and you know who your true friends are through those times.
Saves a lot of time after that.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about, so you graduate, you graduate university, you're now a lawyer, and you've become such an advocate for sexual assault victims and child sexual assault. How has this work affected you personally?
Well, it's very hard to say, because I've been doing it for so long. So I don't know what I'd be like without the work, but on balance, it's affected me in a very positive way, because people who have been sexually assaulted or people who have been falsely accused of sexually assaulting people, which is a wickedness in itself, but does happen. And I found that out to my surprise in the latter years of being a prosecutor. So horrendous. But all those people who have had going through terrible times need someone to help them, and there's nothing better for any human being than to help others through hard times. If you're not helping others, you're wallowing in your own small problems, and your mind sends you insane. It really is because if you're helping people with major problems, as has been my whole life, either victims of serious crime or people who have a genuine case in defence of an allegation, I just look at my little problems and think that's nothing. Whereas I know very well, this is what happens to me on holidays. If I haven't got someone to help, I start thinking, oh no, I haven't done the housework, I'm a failure. Bloody hell, this is shit, you know. Yeah. And you've got to be busy. You've got to be busy in life, and there's always someone to help. And if it's not your job, you can also do it for free. And you and I know we do a lot of that too.
Absolutely.
Because people come to us if you're that nature. People know that. What my mother calls it, the nurses and the patients. That life is broken up into those sorts of people. Some people always want something. Every time you pick up the phone, it's another problem you've got to help them with.
Yep.
But correspondingly, people always come to the people who will extend a hand of help.
Absolutely, and it's something that you talk about is, I think, like I'm a 10th generation first responder in my family.
Yes.
And also my military service of my family goes back to the Boer War.
Wow.
And right up to the modern day. And my mum was a nurse for 44 years, and she downplays her service a lot and says, I was just a nurse. And for the last 15 years of her career, she was in palliative care. And I still don't know how my mum did what she did. And you're true. Like it is so true in the sense of, we all want to. We've all got service in us, and we all want to help people. But as you've said, as at the start of the podcast as well, is that it's few and far between now. And society is changing. It is very different to.
It's becoming too much individualism.
Absolutely.
Instead of community mindedness.
Exactly, and we've lost, and like going down and joining the Rotary Club or joining your local fire service or whatever, or joining the Salvation Army. Those days are few and far between now. People are very much and this country, as you know, was built on the heart of a volunteer.
All of that.
That's what we were. That's
right.
Our value. The
schools and the hospitals, propped up by the great religions of this country,
yep.
who everyone volunteered their help and service, and the poor people contributed what they could money-wise to make those things that some
yep.
people talk about, the church and its wealth and everything. Well, the church in this country got everything it had. And Rome, for example, in the Catholic Church, or wherever, or London for the Anglicans, they weren't sending money out here. It was all done by the hard work of the poor people here who contributed their blood, sweat, and tears, and their might, their shilling a week or something.
Absolutely.
To get all of this done. And that's the great spirit of this country.
And we've lost. And yeah, we've sort of lost. We could definitely go down a rabbit hole with that and how we are in our state of affairs. And we're going to get into your faith a little bit later and how important faith is to both of us. We're both very faithful, and we'll get into that later. But I want to touch on a subject with you that is very close to your heart. Is that you were assaulted as a young person as well, sexually, and if you can share with us, don't go into full detail, but if you could share with us what happened and Was that a major factor in you getting into being a voice for victims?
Definitely. And it's no problem to speak about it now because it's so long ago, and it shaped every part of my life in a sense because nothing was really done about it. And I learnt that things can happen under the noses of parents. Well, they could then. I'm talking the early 1960s, when I was a preschool child was when it started. And there was a trusted person brought into the household, not a relative exactly, but someone who was trusted because some sort of distant relative, not a blood relative of mine. But he was a person with a disability, very serious physical disability. But he was trusted to mind two little girls. And unfortunately, he was a sexual deviant. Well, he was. And but I had no words to tell my parents about it. And in fact, one time when I tried to raise the subject, I was told you mustn't speak ill of that man because of his disability. And so I thought, and then I started to think, well, maybe he can't help it because you could clearly see because he couldn't walk properly and so forth. He was different, and so I just thought you've got to put up with it. And even that, but when he died when I was 7, and I felt bad about being glad about that. And then when I was about 18, when I told my mother the full story, she didn't want to hear about it. She said, "Don't speak ill of the dead," and that's the end of that. And so I thought kids do need a voice because I'd love to be able to talk about it, maybe just talk it through with someone. And so then when I had been a lawyer for about 10 years and working for 10 years in the New South Wales government, the child sexual assault provisions came in where it made it finally possible to convict someone on the word of a child, because for so long a child's word was worth nothing in a court. And because that was just the way it was. They had no power. And so they advertised at what is now the DPP for advocates to meet with children to represent, or not to represent them, but to prosecute offenders in court, but to take the children through the whole process of giving evidence and giving them a friend in court, support persons and so forth. And I became in charge of the child sexual assault unit in the Director of Public Prosecution's office, that was back in the mid-1980s. And that was very satisfying for me because even then, and because it's nearly 40 years ago now, the magistrates, there was one or two female magistrates, but I never got them. The male magistrates, some of them would say, what's this kiddie sex case you've got, in a very pejorative way. And it was clear that the children weren't really going to be believed that easily. And it was very much harder to get that across. And I came to realise that for good, decent, law-abiding people with no sexual depravities, they could hardly believe that men could do this. They couldn't believe it. And I think that was something that went on in the churches too, where the imposters in the church, the people who joined the church because it was access to children, they weren't really priests, religious clergy or anything like that. They were agents of something else. But they got away with it because the parents couldn't believe that men could behave like this. And in time, I had a role in putting out into New South Wales and probably Australia the proof about pedophiles because I prosecuted Dolly Dunn and Colin Fisk and Philip Bell, very famous pedophiles with networks among themselves and huge numbers of victims over their long lives. And they'd share victims. They had coordination whereby they'd pretend to be the uncle of one with one boy and the uncle of one with the other boy, and take the boys away and just seduce them, not in a good way, and maybe that's the wrong word, but to draw them in to all of this, all of the trappings or apparent advantages of hanging out with them while they were gradually groomed into sexual depravity. And so when I prosecuted Dolly Dunn, there were videos. He'd kept videos in a way that he had once said it's like people keeping wedding photos, videos of actual sex acts with small children. And I asked the judge to watch them, and he said, I don't want to watch it. And I said, Your Honour, you have to. You have to, and there are journalists in here who will communicate to the public that this is happening. This was in the late 1990s. Before that, even my own parents wouldn't really believe that it could happen, and other good, in inverted commas, people. And so, but finally it got out there that you've got to look after your children. You've got to be wary of people. You've got to look out for this, because there are some, fortunately, very small percentage, but you've got to be on guard for the small percentage of people who are sexual offenders.
Absolutely. And like these names that you mentioned, like I'm only in my 30s and I've heard of these names, like, and Dolly Dunn and all these names that you have prosecuted. I've heard of these people, and you're right. They're sick. Like they bring these young, innocent children into these rings, and like it's
the kids they get them so young.
Absolutely.
And the children just they introduce alcohol, drugs, fun, surfing, other great things, mucking around with vehicles on farms, all kinds of stuff for these boys who enjoy it. And then perhaps the moment of sexual assault is unpleasant, but it's all mixed up for them, and even unfortunately they'll try to make it pleasant, and close your eyes and pretend it's this, that, and the other thing. The ways of grooming, I know them all. I've seen them. I've cross-examined these people, and in fact, learning how different it was in the night. Sometimes I just wanted to know, so I'd cross-examine some of these pedophiles about how it all started back for them back in the 50s and 60s. And some of them would explain that a lot of the more progressive people in society thought that they were doing these boys a favour because they might have come from perhaps poorer backgrounds, but isn't he kind? He's taking him to the opera, he's taking him out to dinner, he's teaching him all these wonderful things. It doesn't matter about that, he must be
We'll turn a
he
blind
must
eye.
be gay or something, even though he's 12 or 13. And so that they thought it's being progressive, and one must remember that in those days all homosexuality was illegal. There wasn't a cut-off of age, and so if people accepted homosexuality, albeit being illegal, they weren't really focusing on what age people were. They just thought, they must be agreeing with it. And so a lot of people were facilitating this type of stuff. And so it's very I found it very interesting in a horrible way about how many well-meaning people facilitated the abuse of children.
And I think for you, because you're a mother of 3, and you've seen some absolute, like, some disgusting things, how did that affect you, like, mentally as a mother, and being that mothers are caring and they care for their children, and did that just make you have I want to nail you, like, or what was it for you?
There were times I thought that, and there were times I thought, well, I'm going to go hard against this bloke as though it's my own child, just as I would want that to happen if it was my own child. And I must confess that when I did see one of the Dunn videos, there was a 7-year-old boy in it. And at the time, my middle boy was 7, and I just kept seeing his face. And so that does fire you up a bit. But after all, it wasn't to the detriment of justice in that there was no denying what this guy did. It was on film.
Yeah.
And that's why the judge had to see it. That's why I had to convince him that he said, why can't you just write this out in words? I said, because talk about 1,000 words per frame, you just won't know. And in fact, one of the things that the judge had to understand was that this 7-year-old boy was so used to it that he'd come in and get ready himself and have a in those days a $20 note waved in front of his eyes, and he'd just steel himself for it, and he'd just go through it. And that's what people didn't understand, because they thought that if a child was abused, they'd tell someone straight away, they wouldn't put up with it. But he'd been groomed.
I've had a police friend of mine, she's in the child sex squads now up in Queensland, and I said to her, I don't know how you do your job. I couldn't do your job. What you do is just, and that's why, like with you, Margaret, as well, like seeing like the trauma that you've seen, and it is trauma because you're seeing things that are just disgusting, that you would think that how can human beings do that to another human being? I just
don't know.
Yeah, like that. There's just something not right. And
the evil
is
indescribable. But gosh, I've seen some evil, because I've done a lot of murder cases too.
You have.
And torture cases. And isn't it awful to imagine that those people walk among us?
And just, I think too is, I'm glad you brought it up with the church, because I know how faithful you are, and I am as well, and I'm really glad that you touched on that, as that there was these sick people had infiltrated something that is so sacred, and you're right, they weren't priests, they were pedophiles that had got
seen a way to get close to kids.
And for that, I'm glad you brought that up, because people should always remember that there is a line, and and to this day, I do sometimes feel sorry for religion, because it has been tarnished by these.
It was attacked
imposters.
by evil.
Absolutely.
But that will always happen to religion on this earth.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into some of the murders that you've worked on shortly, but I want to talk about, still talking to you as a prosecutor. You were involved, you prosecuted murderers, which you've said, and you'd also pedophiles, rapists, and one of the cases that you worked on was, and this most of the listeners would know, Bill Skafs and his gang. How did you come to prosecute him, and was it great work done by the police in getting him and his gang off the streets?
Oh, it was great work done by the police. The police it was the first sex case that was investigated as well as a murder. And also, it was historical forensically in New South Wales, because the mobile phones were involved, and it was, yeah. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
The offences took place in 2000, and so mobile phones were fairly new. They'd been around, I suppose, for 5 years or so. Not smartphones, of course, but the mobile phones helped so much in the detection of the offenders and what they'd done and how they'd coordinated in this particular case. And so in that case, for the first time, even including murders, the police had used the cell towers to find out where precisely the offenders were. And in the case of Muhammad Skaf, the younger brother of Bilal Skaf, who was the ringleader, he was only a 16-year-old kid. He went to jail for a very long time, arguably longer than he ever deserved. And I even used to say that as a prosecutor. I even said it the day he was sentenced. But he was very... his involvement was this, which assisted the police a lot. With the victim of theirs who suffered the most, 6 hours, 24 offences, 14 men... even hosed down at the end and thrown out like the garbage. The poor, beautiful girl. But she was so clever and smart. She remembered so much. She was able to describe everyone so well. And when she had her phone taken from her by Muhammad Skaf, who then told his brother that he had someone, and he swapped SIM cards with her, and because she had on it the real Slim Shady. Will a real Slim Shady please stand up?
Yep.
And he liked that sound because he heard it go off on her phone. Swapped SIM cards, and so unbeknownst to them, a SIM card sends a signal, a phone handset sends a signal, and they could prove that was in, and so that really cracked the case in so many ways. And so the police did a fantastic job. I'm still friends with so many of the police from that case. That they were just brilliant, and it was great. And their work changed things, because I remember speaking to the commander of Bankstown years later, and he said, "We've just had none of that since then. Nothing. It stopped." And there were other offenders too. Not even necessarily associated with that, it all stopped. It was such a salutary lesson. Of course, the people who paid the price were the I think 9 out of 14 were identified. There's 5 missing. And those 9 did jail of various lengths, but 5 got away with it, but they all stopped.
And for you, a rewarding sentencing and getting all of them convicted, and I still remember, because I was only little, but I remember that. Like, I remember on the news, I remember the biggest thing that I remember from Bilal Skaf is the smile that he had when he still had a smile on his face and showed no remorse, and the way that, as you say, the victim was treated was just disgusting.
And he was involved with 3 other victims as well, and probably more, but he was convicted in relation to 4 who were all very cruelly treated. It was very bad. They in some ways, I felt so sorry for them, because they had befriended these guys as though they were just, as they should have been, normal Aussie guys.
Yep.
But there was just such an element to it.
Absolutely.
And they were the one. I did receive some criticism at the time for a racist prosecution, and I had to say, look, that's wrong. If they hadn't mentioned anything about race, no one might have ever noticed what race they were. But the epithets they used, Aussie slut, Aussie pig, and to that lady that I was referring to, 6 hours of horrendous torture, when they first were speaking to her, they said, "Are you an Aussie?" And she said, "I'm as Aussie as they come," because she was Aboriginal. And I remember talking about this case in a certain circle of conference, and they said, "Oh, look, you've all only gone hard on it because it's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, and they're not." And I said, "Where'd you get that from?" "Oh, she was on TV." I said, "That was a blonde wig and contact lenses for her anonymity. She's an Aboriginal woman."
And does it? And for even to have that, does it matter?
It
doesn't matter whether
no,
it's
but
whether
it's I don't think that would quite happen now, but sometimes I think I'm on the wrong side of history all the time because I was always criticised for prosecuting pedophiles because it's kiddie sex. I was prosecuted for. I was criticised for prosecuting a lot of the gang rapists because of we can't change it. Their race was a particular race, and there were copycats after that. There were the K brothers in Ashfield doing the same sort of thing, same business, and it had to be stopped. But now I'm criticised for defending people who are charged with things that, in the scheme of things, are so much less serious. Now, I know we can't say, to victims, everything's serious, but so much less serious, the allegations now, than anything like that. Those sorts of crimes just, thank goodness,
have stopped.
And there's many reasons for that. People know that they'll be CCTV, phones will get them. But they've stopped. There's just very, very little of that sort of thing. Sometimes some cases are made to sound like that, but when you look beyond it, it's not like that at all.
No,
there's a lot of consensual behaviour going on all through it.
Absolutely, and I think too that you're right. That I like that you bring up that you sometimes are on the wrong side of history, but I think also too on the right side of history, because be proud in that you played a part in stopping those, and we don't hear of those cases now. That was 2000. That's 24 years ago. That I struggle now to, in my mind, coming to mind is that I can't remember the last time we had gang rapes and things like that. That it hasn't happened for a long time. And you were part of that, of playing a small role as the police were to stop and people
and
learn
educating the public.
Absolutely.
That this is really wrong. The message is, come on, guys.
We're going to face the full force of the law because of what happened with... And
if it's ever sex with more than one, with one woman... reconsider, please.
Absolutely.
Under any circumstances.
Absolutely. And as you are proud of that work, and so you should be. And you'd mentioned that you worked in the DPP, and from how did that come about, and what was working for people who aren't aware? Can you talk us through what the DPP is and the role that it plays in the legal system? Yes.
Well, I was at the DPP since before it was called the DPP. It used to be called the Clerk of the Peace Office, which was an ancient legal formulation for the prosecutor. And I went there, as I said, about 10 years into being a government lawyer, because they were starting to prosecute child sexual assault accused persons, and they really did need, let's face it, probably women to do it, because the poor kids had been victims of men and they didn't trust them anymore. So it was a role for women. There were great men in our particular office as well, although it seems to me that they found it much harder to do. That's a bit of a generalisation, but a lot of them wanted to get out of it pretty fast, because it made them... they were horrified about it, horrified about the way some men would behave, and somehow the women hung in there a bit longer. That's interesting. And anyway, it was a good fit for me. I loved working with the kids and helping them, giving them a voice, because I can't... there's always that I saw myself a little bit, and knowing that things can happen under parents' noses, knowing that kids don't necessarily... Especially in those days, I'm talking about 40 years ago, kids didn't speak up about it because they were scared of being in trouble for saying something really sounding evil against some man who was perhaps known and loved in the family. So I really understood that dynamic, and so I did that, and then became a Crown prosecutor and did a lot of the same trials, but also many other different trials. But I noticed that I wasn't often briefed in things like fraud or drug cases because there's no immediate victim for the. Well, there are many victims, but not someone who's suffered physical depredations at the hands of the perpetrator. And I also got many murders of children, for example, so that I could put my arms around the parents and really think to myself, if my child was murdered, God forbid, I'd want someone who wanted to work so hard to
prosecute and bring these people to justice.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
And for you as a prosecutor, how closely is that relationship that you work with the police? Is it very close?
Yeah, it was really close. And in the serious cases I was doing, I worked with the best of the best police, the most able, clever detectives that New South Wales has ever had. Oh, well, I'm sure that's probably right. I'm sure that's right because there was a sophistication that developed in my time in the criminal law that I don't think was there 50, 60, 70 years ago because trials were so quick. But with the greater development of the criminal law, many more rules, regulations, cases, and so forth, it became much more exacting, and the detectives had to be very, very clever, and they were. And I've gone to so many send-offs lately of great detectives, and but the police force is the poorer that they are. All that great experience, those tremendous leaders, those great thinkers of the New South Wales detectives are leaving us in droves.
And it's a sad state of affairs to see. And I know, like, my cousin recently just resigned from the police after 9 years of service, and he just said to me, he goes, "Ads, I've had enough." He goes, "I've had enough of being treated like crap." And it was, I just said to him, I said, "Oh, mate, like, I'm really shocked that you," and he said, "Ads, if your heart's not in it, your heart's not in it." And as you say, the state of affairs at the moment with the New South Wales Police is, it's appalling. Like, people are leaving the job in droves. And I've interviewed other police that have done 17 years, 20 years, and then have had, enough is enough, we're out. And as you say, that's such a loss to the organisation.
Many of them are my friends, and
Exactly.
I'm so sorry to see them go.
Absolutely.
And at each successive send-off I go to, I think maybe this will be the last, because the new crop of cops aren't liking me so much, because I'm doing a lot of cross-examination, and it's not hard.
But I look at that, and I think too, as you know, like you've had some really clever police detectives that have left the job, and I, like, when they get up on the stand, it's like they go, "Oh my God, like we're being cross-examined," and that some of them would have been a challenge for you to like. Well,
luckily I was on their side most of the time.
That's right.
It's a little less challenging now. Of course, I'm extremely experienced, and I know a lot about police procedures and what should happen. And of course, I even though I haven't done it, and I have great respect for everyone who joins the police, because as we said before we started this interview, Ads, the police, everyone who joins the police joins to help society, and I admire them all for doing it. I went into the public service for the same thing, to try to get a job where I can help people. Police all do that, and so do the fireys, so do the ambos. I reserve my judgment about some of the other law enforcement agencies where people have not joined to help people. They've joined to wreck people's lives.
Absolutely.
But police, no, to a man and woman, they join to help people. And I admire them all. I respect them all. But there's unfortunately a gap in leadership now, because there's been such an exodus of such talent, and that makes it hard for the young people, and they make rookie errors, and literally they say things that can't be right. They use the wrong expressions, and how about this? Detective sergeants sometimes are so young, they've never given evidence in a court before. And I remember the days when, before court attendance and everything like that, trainee detectives would be in court all day watching court. That was part of their training, and they'd be the court officer. But they learnt from that. They learnt what not to do. And to imagine that there could be a detective sergeant who's never given evidence... And of course, giving evidence is a skill, and I don't mean that they develop how to be mendacious or untruthful. It's a skill because you should be able to explain everything you did, but and to know the principles behind why you did it. But and what sorts of cross-examination always comes up. But gosh, it's a shame, because people have had to be promoted and they haven't got the experience. I'm sure it will catch up. I hope so. But I also hope that with police and the DPP, there seems to be this creeping idea that we're on a side and conviction at all costs. It's become a bit of a numbers game. Whereas as I was brought up by Reg Blanche and Nick Cowdery, the first two directors of public prosecutions, and as I know all the police were that have been my close friends for years, you start with a blank slate. Just because you've got a statement from someone saying something happened to them, you don't just accept that and stop investigating. You don't say the victim straight away. That means you don't investigate anymore because you've made up your mind. You can't. And detectives the old detectives told me how they were. You start with a blank page. Okay, that's what you say. Thank you. Sign here. Now we go out and see. We test every bit of that to see whether any of that can be possibly true before you go and arrest some person of good character who's never done it before and throw them in the back of a paddy wagon with handcuffs on, and they've got no criminal record for 45 or 60 years or whatever it is, and you've believed someone who might be mistaken, who might be crazy, who might have a reason to embellish. This is what country are we in?
And I think too, it's a great point you touch on, is that I was always brought up with innocent until proven guilty. And,
definitely.
And the evidence will always lead to the truth. Like whatever the evidence is presented, you will eventually get to the truth.
Yeah, but get the evidence.
Exactly right.
Get the evidence, and
first.
It's rarely one statement.
Yeah, that's right.
Check it out before you go and arrest someone.
Well, you have to, because that, as you say, that you could arrest someone that it could destroy their life.
And it does.
And it does.
And I see that all the time. And so people think I've changed because I used to be a prosecutor and now I'm defence. Well, I have to say it's not just. I haven't changed that much. I've publicly said, and I always did as a prosecutor, getting the conviction of an innocent person would be my worst nightmare as a prosecutor. That would be my worst nightmare. If some liar got through and an innocent man went to jail, that would be terrible. And now we uncover so often in trials in a way that I never saw before that what the statement that they've based it all on has got a lot of flaws in it and doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Absolutely. And for you mentioned being a prosecutor. For you, how rewarding was it when you actually got a conviction, and for you, all that work, and you were working, as you say, for the victim, and for you, how rewarding was that?
Yeah, or the dead child,
or the dead child,
and his,
yeah,
and his
or the
or her
family,
parents.
or what was that like?
That was particularly good because you knew how much a mum and dad whose child had been tortured, murdered, hog-tied or strangled with a cable tie, how much they needed that to move on. So that part of it was rewarding, and particularly when you knew that a huge body of evidence made the conviction very safe, very safe. So that's rewarding. That was rewarding, but it's equally rewarding to see a man who has been accused of something that in the end can be proved to be wrong, that someone of somewhat dishonourable temperament embellishes and forgets or just recreates what has really happened, and this is in the sexual area. To see the terrible time and the suffering that a man accused of something as heinous as a sex crime, if it's not true, that we have to recognise that a false allegation or an unsure allegation that is somehow relegated to or said to be certain, that's a terrible thing, because could a man be accused of anything worse than a sexual crime against women? We all hate it. I hate it. I hate it the same as I hated it when I was prosecuting it. But I hate an allegation which doesn't stand up to scrutiny too, that has made a man suffer for years and years, has led to his parents, for example, having to mortgage their house and lose everything they've worked for just to be found not guilty but not given any
compensation. And we're going to get into some of your cases a little bit down the track, and some that have touched you in your career. But you talk about the willingness at the start of the podcast. You talk about your willingness to serve, and as a public servant for you, and there's some people that they don't have the drive that you have as a public servant, in that they go, oh, it's a cruisy job, we're just doing it, and it's nice and cushy. For you, you went above and beyond that. And where did that drive come from, being of service to the public?
Oh, I've probably explained it a bit, but I also loved court work, and so it's not sitting in the office with a pen or now a computer.
Yeah.
If you turn up to court ill prepared, well, you're just going to be so embarrassed and humiliated. So that's enough in itself. So yes, I was a public servant for 42 years, but for most of those 42 years, I was in court most days doing what people on the other side did for probably a lot greater money. but that, be that as it may, lucky me to have that experience and become a very experienced advocate, and so that was a drive as well as helping the people that I was helping. Also, the drive comes from thinking, well, I don't want the judge to call me a moron the next day, and I have been through those years of judicial bullying. Even when you're really well prepared and everything like that, some people on the bench, especially in the old days, but there's one or two still left, would just give anyone a hard time. Even if you knew you were right, but you've just got to kowtow and play your role. Your role is if they're against you, well, you've got to just plough on and go try it a different way.
Absolutely. And what have you learned about cross-examination, both as a prosecutor and now as defence? And do you approach them in the same way, or do you approach them differently?
It's just the same. It's just the same. You've got to know your brief really well. And if you've got, the simplest example is two people who are both on one side, and there's differences. And so you've got to be ready to cross-examine the first one about what you expect the second one to say, and you know that there's a conflict, so you just get them to just blow it out. Just put bells on it and whistles on it, and just get them to explain it so much. And then when the next one comes in and you get them to explain it and it's all different, and it just tears the whole foundation away, because these two principal witnesses have been so wrong about that. So they're probably so wrong about the things they agree with as well. But it's so that's how you do it. But it's no use just picking up the brief and just doing one at a time. You've got to integrate it all and make a note for one person about what someone down the other brief says, and check it with them. If the police say they asked them about this, check with that person. The police asked you about this? No, they didn't. Oh, great. And then you say to the police, you didn't ask them about that. Oh, I did. Well, and so it's a matter of integration, and just so you've got to keep it all in your mind. It's I'm a bit messy, and I've got notes all over everyone's statements, but somehow it gets there.
Well, you've been very, very successful over the years, and for you, looking back now, and obviously you don't keep a tally of this, but in your career, how many murders would you say that you've been involved with?
Prosecuting, 50 or more, and maybe probably more actually, because I did my first murder trial in 1993, and I probably did 5 or 3 or 4 at least a year, and at the end, the last maybe 15 years, that's all I did was murders. Oh yeah, probably much more, 100 or more. But as a defence counsel, I've done about 6 or 7 only, about maybe a couple a year, maybe 10. But I have got a few people off bum murder raps, and the most important one was a poor gentleman called Kulwinder Singh, who the police totally believed had burnt his wife to death, I think on racist and sexist grounds. And undoubted, and I preface this by saying that the wonderful judge, Justice Natalie Adams, who heard 2 trials, the first one was a hung jury, and it was before I realised how misconceived the prosecution was. She heard the 2 trials, and in the end he was acquitted, because we did so many inquiries to find out that, what really went on well, there was plenty of evidence, but it all pointed to her lighting herself on fire, not meaning to kill herself, but it got out of control because she didn't understand that petrol was much more flammable than kerosene. She didn't understand that man-made fabric was much more flammable than wool, and she meant to just make a little fuss based on a movie she was watching, an Indian movie called Gadar, and we got to the bottom of it in the end. But the judge who presided over both trials, a woman who used to be a Crown prosecutor, never a defence lawyer, gave costs to Mr. Singh and said it was really a baseless prosecution, and there was plenty of evidence, but it all it didn't point to him. But the police just and actually the police, I take that back. The police didn't charge him. They realised that there was no evidence, but it went to a coroner's court, and the coroner recommended he be charged, and he was, and it was really wrong, and he suffered so much, and but I was able to say to the jury, he was a man who had been here for 30 years and worked so hard, so had his family. And he'd done quite well, but all of that was lost in his defence. He was a man who'd never had an alcoholic drink. He'd never had a cigarette. He'd never gambled. He'd never used any form of pornography. They were looking for things like that. He'd never been to a brothel. He'd never done any of these things. All he'd done was work hard, look after his family. He has two beautiful sisters who begged me to take the case in my first year as a defence counsel. And they told me two things. That the deceased lady always used to wear her long hair down her back, but this time she had her hair up in a wet towel as though protecting it and hoping inferentially to survive. And also they told me about a phone call that she made. She rang the police because when she set herself on fire to get them there quickly. She rang them before she set herself. She put a bit of petrol on herself, just a small amount on the front of her, and she rang the police, and then she rang her brother, because this is so interesting especially for you, and I've probably told you before, Adam, or you know it. Two fire experts gave evidence, and they both agreed the petrol was applied to the fabric about 10 minutes before it was lit. Now, if it's a mad husband putting you on fire, there's not 10 minutes.
No.
Because you'd be screaming the house down, and the neighbours who are so close and who heard her scream when she was on fire would have been there as well. Absolutely. You wouldn't let yourself be waiting 10 minutes. And sure enough, they both agreed, 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, she rang her brother, probably thinking, will I do it or won't I do it? And her brother was busy at work, and she said, oh, I'm not happy, whatever. And he said, oh, this again. Could you? I'm at work. Just let me. I'll speak to you later. Please stop bugging me. And so that upset her too. So she lit herself, and that because that call was in the middle. She didn't say anything about. She had to have had petrol on her then, but she didn't say anything about it, and there was nothing in the background. And then the 000 call went for 3 minutes. Hello, my name is, I live at so-and-so and so-and-so. No panic, no one in the background screaming. And this poor man, anyway, not guilty. And I've had a few of those. Two Irishmen who were attacked by a bloke who, in the dark, who were waiting for them because they were so drunk. And he was an older bloke, and they punched him because they were attacked and they were drunk. But he died because he fell on the ground and he was old and sick. But they were charged with murder and they were in jail for ages. But not guilty. It was self-defence. Another few examples I could give. But
Margaret, you have, throughout your career, you have faced some criticism. And I want to talk about, and in the media, I want to talk about one incident that happened in 2005 when you were asked to give a talk at the Newcastle University, speaking to law students, and some criticism came your way. And can you share with us what happened? But there's a quote that I want to read out that I want to give some context to the listener, and then I'll get your views on it. And the quote is, "What I wish to challenge you to do in your practice of the criminal law is to bring your sense, your humanity, and your conscience with you. Justice isn't achieved by ambush, trickery, dragging proceedings out in a war of attrition with witnesses. It's achieved by honesty, balance, and proportion. As lawyers, you have a power. Be good with it." That is a very powerful statement, Margaret. And in your opinion, do you think sometimes lawyers forget this? And for you, I love that statement. Where's the criticism?
Well, thanks. And, actually my husband, Greg Wiley, just walked into the room and he gave me that line about, he's not a lawyer himself, but he said, he gave me that, as lawyers, you have a power, be good with it. And that's how I ended the speech. And I told him that I'd done that. And I thought that it was going to be, I didn't know anyone. I knew it was successful on the night because all the kids at the university who were first-year lawyers were inspired and happy. And I don't care about the criticism because it came from two quarters. One was well, they were both criminal solicitors. One has long since died in fairly... Well, there were many inglorious things about him. One remains horribly alive, and there are many inglorious things about him. Anyway, two defence solicitors, and they would say that, wouldn't they? They would try to criticise me because at the time I was a hard-working prosecutor who often successfully prosecuted their clients. So that was all that was about. And the hook for their complaint was that I spoke about a case that was still limping on, and that was the Skafs gang case, because those kids wanted to hear about why it was still going on. And so I took the precaution of discussing that case using initials only. So I didn't even use their names, but just to explain, because they all said, why is it still going on? How many appeals are there? What was that appeal for? And all this. And it's a lecture at university, and yet the complaint was she's publishing information about a case that's still going. It was a spurious complaint. In fact, the terrific thing that happened, what a coincidence, because I saw this gentleman only today, and I'm speaking of former Premier Bob Carr. On the way, the Telegraph printed it, some of it the next day, and filled in who I must have been speaking about. Cunneen speaks about the Skafs case, blah, blah, blah. But I hadn't actually mentioned the name. And I'm not being critical of the Telegraph, good on them. And but so straight away the complaints were made by these two fairly notorious criminal solicitors. And my boss at the time, one of my bosses at the time, rang up and said, "Oh God, what have you done?" And I said, "I don't think I've done anything wrong. Don't worry, don't panic. It's okay. I don't think." And it was a very esteemed lecture I'd been invited to. As I said, I'm just a foot soldier, and I'm following in the footsteps of Chief Justice Gleeson and these great Chief Justice Spiegelman, all of these people, and they'd asked me, and I tried to make it an inspiring speech. And I think it was, reading it again almost 20 years later. But and so then I was really worried, and I thought, what have I said? Why, what a shame I'm driving home in ignominy rather than, because I stayed the night and had dinner with all the kids and spoke to them all and offered for them to come and go to court with me. And on the way home the next morning, this happened. I got that call, and then I turned the radio news on, and it was 10 o'clock or 9, 10 o'clock in the morning, and they said, Crown Prosecutor Cunneen rips into the Skafs or something, or whatever it is, and he's complained about by these two people. Yep. And Mr. Carr, what do you think about Crown Prosecutor Cunneen's comments? And he said, "I agree with every word she said." and I thought, right, I'm not going to be sacked now. No, that's... Well, and I saw him today in Martin Place, walking along, but even at his older years, he was walking along at a great clip, and I thought, that's inspirational. I want to be walking that fast in 10 years when I'm his age.
Absolutely. And I look at the comment, and I look at the statement, and I went, and in preparation for our podcast, I did my homework. I did my research, and I read your book, and I read through and it was brilliant. I don't see where the criticism... It was ridiculous.
Well, you see, you have to silence people in this day and age, and I've been on the receiving end of a few attempts to silence because people have their own agendas, and they mightn't be the correct agendas, but they might be their money-making agendas. And in the cases of those people I'm speaking of, it was to get a good result for people who mightn't have deserved it, and I was standing in their way, and that's what that was all about.
Absolutely, and thank God that you did stand in their way, and we've mentioned earlier on in the podcast of the Skafs and good that they're still rotting in jail where they should be.
Only one is still in jail, and I think he's probably done just about enough too, and the others probably did more than enough. Come on, they didn't kill anyone.
No, that's true.
Let's get it in perspective, and we must never be party to this idea that sexual assault is worse than murder, because it's not.
Absolutely. No, good point you touch on there, absolutely. And I want to touch on that in 2007, so that first controversy happens, where there's more coming, and we'll get to that shortly with ICAC, and we'll get down in the track. But in 2007, you were appointed to senior counsel, and what was that like for you to be appointed to this position? And for those who don't know the law system, how do you get appointed to this position?
Well, no one knows. It's like how they appoint the Pope. A bit of smoke goes up and suddenly you're there, and you've got no idea how it happened. And because you've tried for years. Everyone seems to have to try for years.
Yep.
And then some team get together and they speak to 1,000 people and add up the numbers, and then you get there. And it's a nice recognition. As a public servant, it doesn't make a lot of difference. I think it makes a bit of difference for me now, because just on the basis that people know they have to pay more for a silk than they have to pay for a junior counsel, although I hope it's worth it, but and I hope I'm not one of the most high-paid ones, and I know I'm not. And you know, it's not about money really. Certainly at this stage. And I was happy on that. I would have done my job as a prosecutor for nothing. I'd do this job for nothing. It's just so rewarding. And gosh, what else would I be doing? I'd be retired, and they'd say, "Get a hobby." What would you do? Go and watch court cases?
Yeah,
I love them.
And it's good thing you touch on that, because I've been involved in. I was a juror, and it was fascinating to be part of that process and seeing how it works, and because you see it on TV and it's nothing like TV, and when you're involved it's all and for me it was great, because I know they say stay impartial, but on ours I'd made my decision by day 2.
Really?
By the evidence that was presented, I'd already and ours was a 7-day court hearing, and day 2 I'd already 100% I'd already knew my I'd come to that realisation of, this person is guilty. And we got to day 7, and we had to come back for day 8, because one of the jurors was, she took the emotion into it. And as the judge said at the start, she said, take the emotion out of this. You need to, the evidence, what the evidence is presented is what you need to reside on. You need to make a judgment on whether the person is guilty or not guilty. And the lady was playing on but she's a mother of 6, and she's, and it's like, no, the evidence is clear as day. It's this, and that's it. And it was, but it's fascinating, as you say, to go and see. And like being caught, and I loved it. It was really,
it's like a test match.
It is.
Yeah, because things move and change. Oh, and a bit. Yeah, and they're winning. Yeah,
and you see that the crown is, you see the crown's case, and then you see the defense, and you see, and it's amazing, and it's this. Okay, he's up 15 love, then okay, then return of serve, okay, now it's 15 all, and it's amazing, and as you say, what would you do if you weren't doing what you do now? But I want to touch on some of the cases that you've worked on throughout your career, and one of the cases that you were involved in was the collar bomb case with young Madeline Pulver, and that case it hit headlines. And how did you get involved in that case?
I was just briefed in the office, but no doubt, as usual, because I could get on well with a young woman and her mum and dad. And I remember I said to Mr. and Mrs. Pulver when they came in, I will do this case as though it was my own daughter. They said, because they're very smart, wonderful people, and said, how are you going to run it? And I said, I'll do it as I would if it was my own child, because I didn't know at that time how I was going to run it, and what's the use of going into it with them really at that stage? But I just wanted to assure them that I would give it everything, and it wasn't. He pleaded guilty. That we were doing the sentence in the end, but we had to emphasise all the areas, and he did 10 years for that, and that was just right, probably. And he got it. He's out now. It was quite an unusual thing for such a man to do, and maybe he didn't realise how absolutely horrible it was. And what a huge case it would become. But for poor Maddie, awful. But she has come through brilliantly because she's got a great family.
And was it a case of mistaken identity?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
he thought it was a different family. He thought she was the granddaughter of a very wealthy businessman who lived close by.
And as you say, like, I'm glad that she's now gone on and
the family's wonderful because they all stuck together. That they were such a cohesive and loyal and very fine, loving family.
Absolutely. And one of the other cases that you worked on was the gangster Margaret Cunneen and his reign of terror back in the late 90s, and for people who aren't aware, and some people live in other states, Margaret, can you give us a little bit of background of Michael and what he was charged with?
He was pretty smart guy actually, but he wasted all his talents on crime. I know he was smart because I cross-examined him, and he'd sometimes get the better of me because he knew it better than I did. But anyway, he'll never get out because he murdered so many people. Life for him was very cheap, and possibly the most obvious example of that was when he in Five Dock in Sydney, he just decided to shoot dead two young fellas who were having a little bit of a scuffle outside of the pub, and he was just stopped there at lights. They were the most unlucky, poor young men, but life was so cheap to him, but he was finally. This was the case that I was involved in when he shot a policeman who was in pursuit of him in the area of White City in near Rushcutters Bay, and he shot the policeman as he was climbing a tennis court to go towards him, but then the policeman's partner shot Cunneen, not fatally, but in the backside, and he was in a wheelchair for a while, but it wasn't his spine. But that stopped the reign of terror because he was off to kill someone that night, and whose life was saved. And the bravery of those two policemen, Constables Fotopoulos and Patrice, at the time, was second to none, absolutely second to none. Bravery and coordination, loyalty, and anyway, for many reasons they weren't allowed to see each other for a while, and they didn't see each other until the trial that we were in. And I don't know if I wasn't allowed to do this, but I arranged for them to meet again, and I saw them come together and give each other a hug. And tears were shed, especially by me, because they'd been through that, but because they were put through the ringer about whether it was the right thing to do. My goodness, of course it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely, they're partners like that, and we talked about it off air. Is they're at the coalface, and then
people in the behind the desk.
Exactly.
Find fault.
Yeah,
my goodness.
And I sit there and as you say, is that you like. I'm sorry, a criminal's shooting at them. Like, what are they supposed to do?
They did what they were trained to do.
They returned fire, and they got a very dangerous criminal off the streets, and he's now serving, I think, 3 life sentences.
Yes, that's right. 3, yeah. I know. I felt like saying to him, you don't have to do it all, just do what you can.
Yeah. There's another murder that you worked on and it was your last case as a Crown prosecutor in 2018. Was the is it
Caleo, yeah. An old case.
Yes, yeah. And can you talk me through this case, especially, and when did you know that it was time that your prosecuting days were did that just happen? Like it was,
no, I turned 60 and there was no point staying. If I could do this there's really... I had signed up to work till I was 60. In those days, and I started when I was 18, to work for the government till I was 60. And that's how it went, and my contract, as it were, not really, was up. Everyone used to retire at 60 in those days.
Yeah, right.
And that was my mindset. Couldn't go beyond that. And I thought, well, I still want to work. I'll see if anyone briefs me. But getting back to the Caleo case, it wasn't a complete success because Caleo allegedly had shot his brother, had arranged to be shot his brother-in-law, and had arranged to be stabbed to death his wife. And he was only convicted in relation to the wife. But there's no doubt in my mind that the two were linked because one was in Double Bay, one was in Wallara. There were no murders in the early 90s of anyone in those days, and they were both so shocking, and they were a few months apart, and he had money to be gained by this. But he was only brought to justice on one because the jury did their job faithfully and properly. The evidence was a little bit lacking with the brother-in-law, but with the wife there was a lot more because the person who actually did the stabbing was before the court too, so that could be added to it, and the connection between them. We never found out who had shot the brother-in-law, and so that was a bit harder to prove. Anyway, he'll probably be out soon, but there you are. I met some very nice people in that, including one of his former wives, a Japanese lady who brought up his children for him after he'd shot their mother, or so rather had their mother killed. And she remains a friend. I've visited her in Japan, and she's visited me here. And thanks to her, his children are the most beautiful young women, mothers themselves now.
It's interesting you say that your contract was up because I've had, she's become a really, really good friend of mine, is Deb Wallace on.
Yes.
And
I know her well.
Yeah, you do know her very well. And she said the same thing. It was 60. And she said, it was financial reasons, so I just had to retire. And she said, I still love the job, but financially to stay, it was actually...
Working for nothing.
So, and for you, so I want to go back because you, as we've talked about throughout the podcast, you were a specialist in child sexual assault and child sexual assault in law, and you were appointed the Commissioner of the New South Wales Special Commission of the Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse Allegation. Bit of a tongue twister there.
Yeah, I know, it's a really long title.
Yeah,
the Commission of Inquiry was over before anyone could get through the title.
And for that, you got appointed to that. And for you, you've mentioned throughout the podcast that you've had a real passion and to help people, like child victims who haven't had a voice. Did that come as a shock to be appointed as the Commissioner? No,
it's pretty obvious that there wouldn't have been anyone who knew more about it.
Yeah.
And even knowing a lot about the religion too.
Absolutely. And for you,
I'd prosecuted a lot of priests. I'd decimated an order which was all based on pedophilia in the 2000s. So I knew how it operated. I knew how the imposters infiltrated.
So for you, working, as you mentioned, you started at 18, worked up to when you retired at 60. You were back in those days, a male-dominated profession. Was it hard working your way up the top, being a female, looking back?
No, not at all.
No?
No.
Just
if you did your work, it was the merit principle was very in vogue.
Yeah, right.
And if you were the best, you got it. There were a couple of, for example, I went for a job once when I was working at the Public Service Board of New South Wales in the early 1980s, and I was in the legal section there, and I went for the job that I'd been acting in for months, and they gave it to some other bloke, a fairly unprepossessing individual,
yep.
but older than me and a married man with kids. And I spoke to the boss and I said, how did he get it? And I didn't. And he said, I said, come on, what's gone wrong here? I was at this stage about 22, 23. And he said, oh, well, we've already got you, Mark. We've already got you. But now we can get this bloke here. And remember, he's a married man with kids. He needs the money much more than you do. And I said, can you just say that again? And I wrote it down, pen and paper, and I said, okay, is that your final word on the subject? Because I'm going to Great. Went to Great, won the job. That was in evidence. Because it wasn't that he was better than me. Because, God, but the weeks in between were insufferable when he'd ask me how to do something. and he'd write it down. I wrote down what I'd had, and then he'd say, Margaret, please do. And I was doing all his work for him. Anyway, he wasn't there that long.
I laugh because I think of how you would, really? Like, hang on, I've done the job, I've been doing the job, and now I'm showing it to us.
But the system came good for me.
Yeah, it's good.
And the merit principle was a very good thing. And if anyone's appointed on other things like quotas or anything, I'm disappointed about that, because merit has always been there for the last almost 50 years. In my experience, merit was the principle, and there's no use changing it to quotas so that so many women or so many this and that can get it. You could always get it if you're good enough. And I didn't find any problems at all. If you worked hard like everyone else, you were fine. And I don't see, but that did happen. And I did something about it, and it worked because I brought it out into the open.
Absolutely. And we've mentioned throughout the podcast, you've unfortunately haven't escaped criticism, and I want to touch on the ICAC investigation into you in 2015, and this
2014.
2014, and
not that they got to investigate.
Well, I want to bring this in and then get your thoughts, and I want to bring some context to people. And it was so in your book you talk through the hardships that were brought on your family, and in your book, which we're going to get to later on, is the boxing butterfly and the ICAC bout, which I love that chapter name. That is just brilliant, because we're going to get into something that you love later on in the podcast that people might not know about you. How is this part in your career, and was this the hardest time in your life, looking from a professional point of view? But I'll read the quote out, and then I'll get your thoughts. And the quote is from the late Bill Leake. Would say to you is that you're no one until they go you. And in this case, they certainly did go after you. And can you give me your thoughts on it? Was a witch hunt?
Oh, of course, I can see it so clearly now. 10 years on, it's just gone 10 years since, right in this room, these goons from ICAC came in here asking for phones, but with no reason and with no warrant. And I said, "Where's your warrant?" I offered them a cup of tea because I thought it was an April Fool's joke, because I knew the Commissioner of ICAC very well. I'd worked with her for 30 years on and off in all sorts of things. And I knew, and one of the legal officers there was a good friend of mine too. I thought it was a joke. And I thought, gee, I've got to be cool for this. A cup of tea, okay, yeah. And after a while, it started to be. They seemed to be that serious. They couldn't crack a smile. And I was thinking, okay, come on, is everyone going to run out and go, this is a joke? I honestly thought that because, mate, when they invented ICAC in 1988, I thought they'll never come after me because I don't need to take a buck. I'd work for nothing. And obviously corruption is about getting money or advantage through your work.
Absolutely.
And so I knew that I'd never done anything wrong like that. But they wouldn't say what it was about because they didn't know what it was about yet. They had to try and find something. And oh my goodness, it ended. I think it started off being that they knew that there'd been a car accident because my son's girlfriend had been crashed into and the car written off, and it was a car that I totally legitimately had a salary sacrifice from the office, but I didn't drive that car. My young sons, it was a station wagon or something, a Ford, and it was just something that they used to use if they didn't have a car. And so my son had let his girlfriend drive it home from the city, from her work. She hadn't been out on the town or anything. But she, through no fault of her own, she was stopped at stoplights and she was T-boned. The car was written off and she was injured because she was suspended by a seatbelt. And the ambulance came, the fireys came, and it was thought the car might explode. And people rescued her, and her phone and handbag were left in the car. No communication. But she knew my son's phone number off by heart, and she had someone ring him, and he ran down from here down to Willoughby where it took place. But he didn't ring me. There's no communication there, and she goes to hospital, and I think he goes with her. He gets there just in time to go in the ambulance, and so but then he rang and told me that she's got. And as you would know very well, if you're taken in an ambulance and you've been in an accident, you don't do a breath test, they do a blood test. And she had the blood test. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Yep.
Does ICAC ever ask about that? No. And so 3 days later, when the smash repairer rings me on the... Because I get down there and give the tow truck driver my phone number. And the tow truck driver is at the smash repairers 3 days later. And I know him because he's local. And my middle son works in the automotive industry. And so but we're on a third party's phone who was apparently a drug dealer or suspected, and his phone was being intercepted by the Australian Crime Commission. And the smash repairer says, "Oh, what happened to her?" I said, "Chest pains." And he started laughing because she... Anyway, he started laughing in a rude way, and I did too, and, you know, and there was something about fake chest, something said. And I shouldn't have said it, and it was very bad, not respectful. But I've had jokes before, as you might know.
Of course.
And then, because I wouldn't have had that joke on the day because I was worried about it, but she was fine, thank God, 3 days later, and he was ringing me to tell me the car was a write-off. But it was owned by the DPP, but when I paid all the leases on it and everything like this. And so so he said, "Oh, who owns the car?" And I said, "The DPP." And he said, "Oh." And I said, "Oh, yeah." And he said, "Oh." But it's not about anything wrong.
No.
And and I didn't go into that. And so whoever listened to it from the Crime Commission must have told the ICAC. And I bet the ICAC person said, "Give it here."
We've got her.
Because it was just when that priest commission came up, and I know because people have told me that people expected me to be appointed a judge. I wasn't going to accept the appointment as a judge as I had refused the judicial appointment in 2007 when I was offered the district court. I didn't want to be a judge. It's not me. It's really not me. I'm not an umpire. I'm a player. And I want to be in the pit. I don't want to be up there, deciding. In fact, that commission of inquiry convinced me I didn't want to be a judge. I hated it because I'd hear Adam talking and I thought, oh, that's really good. And then I'd hear Jenny talking, that's really good too. I can't decide. And I knew I'm not a judge.
Yep.
And so, but there was a mood afoot to get rid of me. And that's all it was about. No one thought I had no integrity. No one thought. And what are they talking about? Because they had the blood test and it was zero, and it was all totally misconceived. Anyway, I stuck in a submission to the Court of Appeal, and they said, nah, the ICAC's got no jurisdiction in this. If it's anything, it's a traffic offence or something, and let the police... And the police said, we've nothing to see here. Andrew Scipione, wonderful person, wonderful commissioner, said, we have no problem with this family. No one did anything wrong. And that was good, but they kept going on and on with it because the agenda was stop me from going ahead. Anyway, try your hardest. Have another crack. Go
exactly, and for someone who had given so much in service, and I think, and it was like literally you would see your name in the headlines every day,
because they kept coming up again with something else. Can you believe that at one stage someone from ICAC rang me because they still hadn't formulated what it was they were after? Oh, we need your government e-tag. And I said, I've never had a government e-tag in my life. Oh, really? What about the e-tag on the DPP car? And I said, well, that was a private car, but salary sacrifice. We've got our own e-tag on that. Well, we need it. And I said, what do you need it for? And I said, because he said, to see what time the driver went over the Harbour Bridge. And I said, you don't incur a toll going north on the Harbour Bridge. And he said, do you not? He had no idea. So the investigators, fair dinkum.
But I think about it too in the sense of that, they were looking to find something on you, and like as you say, and we've spoken about it, it came of nothing. There was nothing.
And I think maybe they thought I wasn't allowed to let someone use the car, like how police, if they are not allowed to, of course, but this was just an ordinary vehicle for a public servant salary sacrifice. They didn't understand that because they've got people in there who don't know New South Wales. Who knows where they come from? You can have a guess from their accents, but they've got no idea, and they're told find something.
And as you said, when we go back to when we started the podcast, there's other people that don't do it of a willingness to serve. They're doing it for other agendas. And that's
no one joins that place to help people.
Exactly.
It's the opposite, and that's no good. And it's a parallel police force. We can't have parallel systems of justice.
No.
We have to stick to the time-honoured principles. The presumption of innocence, and we don't water that down for any crime whatsoever.
And you would have seen...
And proof beyond reasonable doubt.
Absolutely. And you would have seen in that, when you were going through that hard time, as you mentioned, you would have seen your true friends in that, and you would have seen people that you thought would support you that ran to the hills, but your true friends, The true friends, thank God for them. And how our family, with those friends around us, just became a more cohesive unit because hardship helps you in the end. Absolutely.
Be strong, and your friends help you. And then I literally had people, quite a number of them, who'd say, "Oh, look, I was feeling sorry for you," or they'd ring and ask for something. They'd go back to ringing and asking me to help them with legal stuff. Like, I'd say, I haven't heard from you for like 2 years. Oh, I wanted to ring, but I thought your phone might be tapped. And I said, what, did you think you'd get in trouble for being my friend?
I laugh at that. I laugh.
Like, they couldn't just ring and say, oh, hey, how are you? They'd be too scared to do that. Well, that's not a friend. No. Mind you, generally I just still help them with their stuff, but they're not a friend.
No, and it's funny that you say that because I've learnt that too in my hardships and things that I've spoken to you off air about my hardships and what I've gone through and faced. And it is interesting when you do face those hardships that you do see who your true friends are and who you thought were your friends, and they're not there. And then when things start to happen where you publish a book or they
want to know you
they
again.
want to know you again, and you go, oh, well, you haven't spoken to me for 10 years.
Have you been overseas or maybe on the moon?
That's right. And you think, hang on, this is interesting. You now want to, that I start knowing these people and start doing things, and it's interesting. And you sit there and go,
but they judged you.
Exactly.
And they just didn't want to have anything to do with you. One of my good friends said, my wife told me not to talk to you while this is going on, not to talk to you anymore, but I still will, Marg. And I can't look at his wife without thinking, thanks a lot.
Yeah, you judged me, but you judged the book,
Yeah, you weren't. I know you're not my friend because I worked with her husband, but for a long time. And when I see her now and she tries to be friendly, I can't forget that. He shouldn't have told me.
And see, I look at that too, and as you say, mud does stick. Like you, and I've recently gone through it, and I spoke to you off air about it and of what happened with me, and it sticks. Like mud sticks, and
People
you don't
always
forget
think that.
And you don't forget.
But then again, for me, maybe it's become something that helps me because so many clients say, oh, you're a fighter, I want you to fight like that for me. Maybe it hasn't been so bad for what I went on to do.
Absolutely.
Whereas the people who started that evil, absolutely fabricated rubbish against me meant to stop my career. But in effect, they made it.
Exactly. And
because the pit that people dig for themselves, sometimes they fall in.
And sometimes
they dig for others. Sorry.
But I think too, it's a great point you touch on is that you give them enough rope and they hang themselves. And you, not that you wish them harm, but there's some people you go, well, you've actually brought that on yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You couldn't even use any of your own resources to wish them harm.
Exactly.
But when you see what happens because bitter, malicious people eventually get their just desserts because they're not. There's an old Zen principle because I know you're going to come to. I've been a martial artist for 40 years. The principle is to lengthen your own line. Don't spend all your energy trying to bring other people down. Don't concentrate on others. Concentrate on raising yourself. You don't just cut other people off. Concentrate on yourself.
If you run your own race.
Run your own race. And don't be trying to look higher than others by wrecking them. Just put all your energy into your own development.
Exactly.
And who cares about, well, good for them, but people who spend their lives trying to destroy the lives of others, well,
narcissists.
That's
what they are.
And they don't get happy.
No.
They get more bitter and
Twisted,
and hideous.
Absolutely, and we'll move forward in that. So that happens. You're cleared, which you never should have. That should never have happened. Lessons learned of who your true friends were, and it, as you said, it probably made your career and.
Yeah, the tail end of it. I'm 65,
yeah,
Ads.
That's right. That's it. It's,
I might fall off the perch tomorrow.
But well, I hope not. Because we've got many more beers to have across. We've got a few more beers to have yet, Margaret. So there's a few more to be drunk together. So
that's good.
I hope not. But
yes.
People might not know this, but the TV show Janet King that aired on the ABC. You inspired the main character. Can you tell us how this came about?
Nick Cowdery, then director, was approached by the producers of that show, which started as Crownies, and they asked him, could Marta Dusseldorp, who was the star prosecutor, could she shadow someone to court? and so he said, I'll bring Margaret up now. And I met with them and Marta. Marta and I became totally best friends, and we still are really good friends, even though she lives in Tassie now. And she was a loyal friend, because we spent a lot of time together in those years when she did those shows. And when she got an AACTA, AACTA award in January 2015 for playing Janet King, she got up and she invited me and I took my son Steve, who was also very cruelly abused unjustly by ICAC. He was accused of perverting the course of justice too. He didn't know anything about such a thing. Didn't know what ICAC was when they raided his place. He really didn't, and they couldn't believe that no one knew about them. But Marta made a speech saying, I play a Crown Prosecutor, but the best of them is here today, Margaret Cunneen, and she keeps our streets safe. She works for us, and this was an endorsement in front of politicians and on TV and everything like this. What a generous friend! She is the most loyal and wonderful person, and she's a fantastic actress. But over and above all of that, she is the most decent, fine and loyal person you could ever meet.
And she played an absolutely brilliant role in Janet King and Crownies but like, I've known you for a while and we've become really good friends, and you're just that lovable person. Like, you are just that person that it is. I actually said it to my family as well, that it's an honour and a privilege to call you a friend. Like, to actually be.
Oh, thanks, Ads.
In your company is.
Well, but what about you? You're a beautiful person, and we just get on, and we had so many things in common.
Absolutely.
Even though, of course, I'm exactly old enough to be your mum.
Well, actually, you're actually younger than my mum.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. A lot of people say that.
But no, you are just that person that is just so lovable, that you give to others, and that, yeah, I don't know who could ever not like you, and I know there are some out there, but
yeah, I know, and but I think I can always say, and this is absolutely true, because you know how I like all people, and until they have a go at me, I like them. You can be as different as you like, or anyone you like, but I think they get jealous if you're happy.
Yeah.
And I think that people owe the rest of the community a duty to be happy. Absolutely. Not to be a misery guts all over the place. And people get jealous of that, and they think your life's perfect. Of course, my life's no more perfect than anyone else's, and everyone has their problems. But at least, we are here to keep up appearances. It's a good old tradition, good old Aussie tradition.
Absolutely.
Keep up appearances of happiness, and she'll be right, mate. And she will be right.
But that's the Aussie way.
That's the Aussie way,
the Aussie
and
way.
we have to preserve that, don't we?
Absolutely. And and this is where, look, I'm going to get controversial here, and I know that you will support. This is where I get annoyed in that, that they're attacking Australia Day, they're attacking Anzac Day, they're attacking Remembrance Day. Like, these are Aussie traditions that we have had for years, and look, I'll say this, Margaret, and look, to some of my listeners it might be controversial, but I'm going to say this because I'm a proud Australian.
Me too.
What happened 200 and something years ago, I wasn't here. No. So why do I get brushed that I am, that I can't
We were
be proud
born here. This is our land
this
too.
This is my land too. Like,
and everywhere in the world, people are born where they mightn't have, where generations ago they mightn't have been. We can't go on about this, especially when there's been such great integration between Aboriginal peoples and other peoples. There's so many, the wonderful Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa Price.
Yes.
She's got a Scottish dad and an Aboriginal mum, and as she said, She doesn't want her family rent in twain by these ideas that everyone's got to be stuck in a box of what they are. We're Australians.
Absolutely.
We're all Australians.
And I say that and I actually have got some runs on the board because I have Aboriginal friends that say, no, we're one. We're one. We are part of
I hear
this
that
country.
all the time.
We're one. We are not. And the divide that is happening is
everyone who comes here and everyone who's born here and everyone who comes here has got to be Australian.
Exactly.
Because this is a great tradition. It's a great character of our country.
Absolutely.
It's built on looking after your mates,
Yep.
looking after
Your
each
family,
other,
yep.
being proud of our land and proud of what's been achieved here, whether it's 200 years ago or 2,000 years ago. We're great knockabout people.
Absolutely.
We don't stand on ceremony. We're not stratified by society. We're able to move between stratas with hard work, with application, with acquisition of skills and education. Any Australian should be able to achieve anything that he or she wants.
Absolutely, and you know it too, that it's hard work is
that's the answer to everything.
It's the answer to what our country was built on is hard work and volunteers and everything.
Looking after your mates.
Exactly.
Looking after those who can't work, but for those who can work,
you get
please,
off and you work. Yeah, absolutely.
Don't wallow around worrying about yourself.
Absolutely.
No more individualism. The community of Australia comes first. Ask what you can do for others.
100%. And I think for you, you've recently travelled and you've come and you see it in other countries of how lucky and how beautiful our country is.
It's always great to get back, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think too, if people that haven't travelled go and travel and see how lucky and how good we have it in our country. We have such a beautiful country, and I sit there and just go, don't attack our way of life. Like we've been built on this for a long, long time.
And many races have gone into this.
Correct.
Over hundreds and thousands of years. That we have our own culture, and it's a great one.
Absolutely.
And we don't want anything to change that wonderful cooperative spirit.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And
We don't want it breaking into tribes.
No, that's right.
We're all Aussies.
Absolutely, and proud of it, and Aussie all the way, like oi, oi, oi.
Oi,
And
oi,
that's,
oi.
yeah, and and I think that's why we're good friends, because we're both passionate and patriotic about our country.
And absolutely accepting of everyone from everywhere else, but as they've always done, as everyone who's come to here from other lands has done, you get here and you
migrate into the way of our life,
and you're so grateful for the opportunity, and you give back, and you become, you of course keep your own culture, and in your home and everything like this. But when we're together as Aussies, we're Aussies.
Absolutely.
Keep your own culture, keep your own faith, but we're Australian, and that's really important.
Absolutely, and so I want to talk about now. You finish in 2018. You finish as a prosecutor. 2019, you go into private practice and become a defence barrister. And talk me through that. And you mentioned that your contract was up. You still had a willingness to serve. What made you choose the defence side? What was it?
It was chosen for me. The DPP could have briefed me as much as they like, and they quite often do that for people who retire at 60 and go to the bar. But I didn't get a single brief.
Yeah, right.
And I frankly think that was foolish, because they could have kept me on the books forever, and then they wouldn't have had me against them.
And geez, they picked someone that
Well, they didn't pick me. So luckily, many other very worthy clients did pick me, and of course, you work for your client.
Absolutely.
So it wasn't my choice. I was a bit surprised. Didn't get a brief, but maybe was that a hangover from them never really thinking that I was completely innocent of the trumped up rubbish from ICAC.
Yep.
Because, if you read one particular newspaper, the mouthpiece of ICAC, you'd think I was never completely exonerated. That was only in the other papers. Anyway, that was decided for me.
Well, in your book, you talk about, and you've mentioned the Singh case, and that was one of the pivotal cases that you worked on. And for you, getting him proven to be innocent, was that one of the more rewarding cases for you?
That's the most rewarding case I've ever done in my life. I had to fight so hard against just two prosecutors who were, the first in particular, just couldn't see the wood for the trees. And it was wicked. If I hadn't really given 100% and 150% of myself in every way to make sure that the lies and the wrong way of looking at all of this was not stopped. And it was racist and it was sexist and it was done by a government instrumentality. And thank goodness, justice was finally done. But anyone with a little less knowledge of the whole system and a little less experience and a little less commitment to the individual, for myself, I was so satisfied that he was an innocent man who could never behave in such a cruel way. And he was put in custody for months. The poor man. His life was made just horrendous, and he was grieving his wife. He loved her, but she was under pressure from her home family, and she couldn't really understand that why she couldn't send all her money to her family there. That's what it was about, under terrible pressure. And so if that hadn't been done, a very innocent man. Well, I don't think he would have survived. He would have. But that's what we've got to stop. So one of my first clients in the defence, a Chinese man who was on remand for 22 months, they wouldn't give him bail, and he was found not guilty of a sexual assault where, come on, the complainant had been begging to hang out with him and the movie star mate. It was just such a lot of nonsense. And he did 22 months in Park Lee. And he said to me, a very wise, smart, very wealthy man in China, he said, "Margaret, there are many innocent people, many good people in jail, many innocent people too." And that was good enough for me, because he went there with no English. He ended up teaching everyone chess. And when he left, when he got out of the jail, I was there to pick him up. And all the correctives officers were going, bye Mr. Wang, bye Mr. Wang. He was so charming and nice. And of course he hadn't raped anyone. He had that much money. Like, really, it's just ridiculous. Yeah. But again, there's a bit of racist prosecution going on. And it seems to me, people might disagree.
No, I think it's absolutely, I think someone like you who has been at the coalface for a long, long time, you can say that statement because you've seen it and you've seen how it's changed.
I can't see why else they couldn't look at the evidence and why a man from India or a man from China gets such a terrible, gets treated so badly.
Absolutely.
And other people as well. But just look at the evidence, people.
That's right.
It wasn't hard years ago. Look for the evidence.
Innocent until proven guilty. And another case that you've worked on now is recently Jarryd Hayne, and the ex-footballer, people know, and you face some criticism again on social media for...
Did I? I didn't see it. Try harder.
But I saw, and to your credit, you came back at some of them and said, no, I only take on cases that I truly believe in. And
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, I'll take on any case as a barrister has to, but if the evidence is there, and the person is guilty, well, you say to them, you must plead guilty, because no one's going to believe this nonsense, and we will put up the reasons why your penalty should be reasonable because of the difficulties in your life. But if you can see that the evidence all goes against it, come on, you've got that's what the legal system is for, and there's nothing like a criminal trial to expose a liar, an embellisher, or someone who's a bit crazy.
And as you say, it's finally good to see that an innocent man is proven not guilty and of what he's alleged to have done.
Well, it's so much different from what people think.
Exactly.
And the text messages absolutely prove that. And come on, it's if people are begged to go to a place for a particular reason,
absolutely,
it's awful to see what might happen to them after that.
You've mentioned throughout the podcast that faith has been important to you and throughout your life. Does faith help you in a sense of, in all the trauma and everything that you've seen and being the cases that does it help you process that?
Oh, it definitely does, because sometimes things go wrong. And in fact, when I saw Jared Hayne convicted on something that I thought that we'd completely opened up, it was really devastating. But he had great faith, and he had to comfort me in the cells. He said, "It's all right, Marg. You know, God will sort this out, and it's just a matter of patience." Faith is the only thing that can help you, because we know that this life is not meant to be perfect. This is not our reward yet. And faith gives you that hope when everything else is gone. And you know, I was talking to a former priest today who's a bit of a friend through a case that happened, of which he was completely exonerated. It was all an absolute mistake. But he said that the faith journey, it is, you've got to be patient when you're waiting on God sometimes. And Moses and Abraham and Jesus, everyone has to be patient. And that's what God expects. But sometimes your answers are instant. But faith is a wonderful gift. I know many people don't have it. I'm kind of sorry for them, because it must be devastating to go through the vicissitudes of life without it. I'm just lucky that my parents and grandparents and the nuns and everyone just, like, honestly, we used to say 9 prayers a day. But what we learned at school, the Christian doctrine is a great education for your general knowledge, for history, for rote learning. I'm very grateful to it, but the faith has stayed.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because for me, and I've told you before that my late Nana saved my life the day that I wanted to end my life 10 years ago. And I know that was a hand of God. I absolutely know that. And I absolutely believe, and I attended church on Sunday and I went to Mass, and for me, I don't care that people might think, every time I go to church, I feel cleansed when I walk out.
It's so rewarding,
it's amazing, isn't it?
And so many people think that you're some kind of anti-intellectual for, what do they say, the imaginary friend? Well, we'll see.
Absolutely.
But for the great comfort that it gives you in this life, and for the rewards that we have the faith to expect in the next. Well, I'm sticking with it.
Well, me too, and I know that eventually, when my Creator is my greatest, He judges my life. I know when I turn up to the pearly gates that, you know, I'll either be welcomed or I'll be sent down to the other world. But I'm hoping,
sure that won't happen.
I don't. Yeah, but and I think as I say to everyone now, is that, Margaret, I wouldn't be talking to you now if I didn't have faith. There's so many things that have happened in my life that if I didn't have faith, I wouldn't be talking to you right now. I'd be a statistic on the wall. So,
well, thanks be to God.
yeah, thank you, Peter. Yep,
Yeah.
thank you, absolutely. And
I don't think I've got anything more to say after that.
No, I think that's absolutely, and I think it's a great way to absolutely on your views on faith and my views, and for you, I want to talk about how do people, and what advice would you give to any young lawyers out there who might be looking to progress into senior counsel and also a QC?
Just take every opportunity. Just because it's hard isn't a reason not to do it. It's a reason to do it. Take every challenge, anything that people offer you, just do it.
Adversity. You learn who you are.
Yeah, and don't worry about what other people think.
And it's interesting you say that, because I remember when I first caught up with you at your chambers, and I laughed because when we caught up, you were like, they were all going to a ball, and you're like, oh God, I couldn't think of anything worse. Like, you know, and you were there, you'd done that in the years gone by, and I loved it because you're like, oh God, I couldn't think of anything worse. Like, so
yeah, come on,
do what you need to do.
You don't have to be a lawyer 24 hours a day. That could be very tedious.
Absolutely. And for you now, and we're nearly getting to the end, and I want to talk to you now. Looking back now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would she listen?
It'd be stand up to the bullies. I used to take it because I thought I had this respect, and they're older than me, they're senior to me, so they must be right. I should have stood up to them, because so many times they just walked all over me.
Yep,
and
been there. Yep.
Stand up to the bullies. And you know who a bully is. You know it when you get the unfair criticism, or you get the person who just, as much as you try, just won't be nice to you. Just stand up to them. And if someone's crass enough to be downright rude to you, just have a go back, no matter who it is. Mm. And I'm not a discourteous, disrespectful person at all. But gosh, I put up with a lot because of this slavish respect for seniority or age. Well, they're not always right. Stand up.
And I think the greatest thing that I've ever had is when you turn your back on a bully, and because it's the utmost disrespect to them that you go, you're not worth my time. And it's interesting that you say that, because I know that myself, is taking my power back, because I gave them so much power over the years. And it's interesting now that I've brought my book out, that they've come back to me now and said, oh, we're really sorry that we did that to you. And it's like, too little too late, unfortunately. Yeah. Like, you know,
I haven't had so many people come back and say sorry. Anyway,
it's
because they were always too arrogant to realise, or they might realise they're in the wrong. But the people who can't say sorry, Adam, it doesn't diminish you to say sorry.
No.
If you've done something wrong, in fact, it doesn't diminish you to say sorry on behalf of your organisation, or on behalf of your colleague, or in my case, my instructing solicitor. If he or she's made a mistake, I'll always stand up and say to the judge, that's my fault, Your Honour. I'm not going to go, oh, he got it wrong, she got it wrong. That's wicked behaviour. People should say sorry, and sorry just smooths everything over.
Exactly.
It's so easy.
Exactly.
Don't be too arrogant to say sorry. We're not,
and don't be
but
too
so
proud.
Many people are.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand that you are a fourth
belt?
Yeah, Dan black belt. I had to. They got a bit in Taekwondo.
Yeah.
What and for you, I wouldn't mess with you.
And now I've been boxing for 10 years, which I do now because I got an arthritic hip and got a hip replacement. But so I can't kick like I used to be able to. That's probably what caused it. But
what does that do for you for your mental health?
Oh, it's
obviously,
fantastic.
Your martial arts background, but now the boxing. What does that do for you?
Well, a really hard workout is great for your mental health, isn't it? Because as soon as you do it, you just feel happy about yourself for having done it, and it's time without even the combinations in boxing. you can't even think about anything else because that people think it might be simple. It's not. You've got to concentrate. If your mind goes off it, then you get it wrong.
Absolutely. And
so it's great to do that, and everyone should work hard at physical exercise because it's the best thing you can do for your mental health besides helping someone else.
Absolutely. And so for you now, what are your plans going forward with your family and into the future for you?
Well, I'm a grandmother now, and it's so great. Family comes first. Family, fitness, faith, and helping people. It's great, very rewarding.
It's pretty special. And you've mentioned that you're a mother, a grandmother. What do you love about these roles the most?
I can't believe how much everyone, those people love me in my role, and of course, and I love them. Grandmothering. Everyone tells you how great it is to be a grandparent, but then this little person starts calling you Nana and runs to you as if they know that you're their grandmother. How do they know this? Is it because they can see how much you love them? It's just I can't even describe the wonderful feeling that it is to be a grandmother.
I can say it as I've become an uncle, and
congratulations.
Thank you. And my little niece she's nearly 3, and my brother and sister-in-law are pregnant again with their second, and it's my mum. The joy that I get, I understand what you mean because I see the joy with mum with her first granddaughter, and it's a mum waited so long she never thought she would have grandkids, and to have grandchildren, it's to like the lighter, like I just see mums, and my mum is very similar to my grandmother who saved my life, and just the love that she has for it's just. And I said to mum, I go, Mum, what's the difference? Like, what's the difference between the love for us and the love of being? And she said, it's a different love. You have like, I love you boys, like. But it's a different love when you've got grandchildren.
Yes, and the other part about it, it's multiplied for this reason. You get to see your child being a parent, and that's just amazing too. And you admire them for not being as cranky as you were, or something that they're doing better, and you learn from them, and that's fantastic.
Absolutely. And in 2022, you published your book, The Boxing Butterfly, A Life of Conviction, Margaret Cunneen SC. What was the writing process like for you, and did you find it an enjoyable experience?
Oh, not really, because I kind of hated it, but and my co-author wants to do more, but I might, but it's a bit of a chore. It's like writing an essay every night, and I'm a bit over that.
You've done that for a long time.
And also, I've got so much court to do, and it seems to take away from that.
And you, as I say, like we're getting right to the end now. And
I hope so.
Yeah.
I have to go to sleep soon, Ads.
And it's been an absolute honour to have you on it and get a different side of your story, and I hope I've done it justice. I really do, and as I say, I did my homework before.
You sure did. Thank you very much. You pay me a great honour, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk.
No, you're a friend, so of course we're having a few beers and enjoying some popcorn, recording your story. So this is amazing. But how do people get in touch with you if they do want to reach out and get in contact with you?
Oh, they can find me. I'm in State Chambers. It's easy.
Yes. So
no one seems to have any difficulty with that. I sometimes I think I'm one of the Beatles. I get so much mail and so many calls.
Oh, it's honestly sitting across from you. It's just been an absolute honour and a privilege. And Margaret, I want to finish with a quote. And you have served your state and your country with honour and brought pride to your family. Your story is one of true grit, determination, and having the courage to be brave and test yourself and succeed at the highest level. The quote is, leadership is about being a servant first. For some people, they come into our life as a blessing. Some come into your life as reasons. A life not lived for others is not a life. Mother Teresa. Margaret, You have given so much to others. You're a blessing to all who come into contact with you. You give and give and give, which is rare in this world. You put others before yourself. I believe this quote sums you up, and it has been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on True Blue Conversations and share your story. So Margaret Cunneen SC, thank you for coming on True Blue Conversations.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Raise your glasses, podcasters. This episode of True Blue Conversations is brought to you by Wet Canteen Bottling Company, the perfect way to commemorate and celebrate life's most special occasions. Elevate your moments, savour the taste, and make them truly unforgettable with Wet Canteen. Head on over to wetcanteenbottlingco.com.au and use the code TRUEBLUE for your exclusive discount. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.